And it is 6:30. I'm Barbara Lee Van Horsen, the experimenter at the Momentum Center, and I want to welcome everybody to our town hall tonight on racism and housing. As people continue to arrive, we'll admit them into the meeting, but we like to start on time because we have so much to cover. You see in front of you the people and the organizations who make up the Anti-Racism Task Force. When you visit those companies or talk to folks representing those companies, please thank them for their involvement and their concern about race and racism in our community. I do need to issue a warning, and that is because we have been Zoom bombed before. We've put all of the security in place that we can to prevent that from happening, but because it's an open public meeting, we can't give 100% guarantee. We have structures in place, so if somebody is a bad actor, we can remove them right away, but I just need to give everybody the heads up that it's not outside of possibility that that could happen. Again, the Anti-Racism Task Force you see in front of you, and our topic tonight is housing and racism. Want to just review quickly some of the other actions that have come out of the Anti-Racism Task Force, as well as an invitation to become involved on the task force if you're interested. We have a very robust resource list on our website. We have a community book club that's led by Wes McGee. We have opportunities to share your reflections and your actions as part of a community. We've been supporting county DEI initiatives and school initiatives as well. We have window clings available for your offices and your homes. We have a partnership with A Long Talk for those who want to go more in depth with these conversations, as well as engage in movie and book studies. We've had workshops on retaining relationships in the midst of conflict, both for adults and for teens. We've been present at the Hispanic Heritage Festival. We just had 40 people return from the Civil Rights Road Trip on very late Thursday, about 1 o'clock Friday morning. And we're planning a conference on religion and racism that'll take place this fall. We like to start with the DEI statement from our county.
Reconocemos la importancia de la diversidad, la equidad y la inclusión en el logro de nuestra misión y lo consideramos un valor básico para involucrarnos de manera proactiva y comprender una variedad de perspectivas a través de todas las diferencias humanas. Buscamos asegurar un trato respetuoso y justo y el mismo acceso a oportunidades y recursos para que todas las personas puedan prosperar y alcanzar su máximo potencial. Creemos que la voz de cada persona agrega valor.
We recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the accomplishment of our mission, and we hold it as a basic value to proactively engage and understand a variety of perspectives across all human differences. We seek to ensure respectful, fair treatment, and full, equal access to opportunities and resources so all people may thrive and achieve their full potential. We believe every person's voice adds value.
And we also have a land acknowledgement that we share. As we begin our time together, we pause to acknowledge the land on which we gather. We recognize the people of the three fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi people on whose land we are gathered. The Three Fires people are indigenous to this land, which means that this is their ancestral territory. Every university, congregation, institution, business, and monument here in West Michigan is built on stolen native land. We also recognize that the Grand River that flows through this land remains home to many Native American tribal communities across the region, including the people of the Three Fires. We are guests on their land, using their water, And one way to practice right relations is to develop genuine ways to acknowledge the histories and traditions of the people who originated here first, who are still here, and who tend to the land and the water always. As we make this land and water acknowledgement, we know it is but an important first step, and that there are many more that we need to take when we decide to engage in the important work of social justice and equity. So welcome again to our town hall on racism and housing. Our speakers tonight will be Dale Zahn from the West Michigan Lakeshore Association of Realtors, Anthony Lambers from At Home Realty, and Lynn Raymond from the Lakeshore Housing Alliance. We'll hear from them shortly, but first we go over our agenda and our ground rules so everyone knows what to expect. We start with our welcoming, our instructions, and our polling questions. We hear from our panelists next. They'll each have 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll have a period of question and answer where we'll invite you to add your questions to the chat box. We'll then go into breakout sessions and report out from those rooms. We'll have some final closings, polling, and then talk about next steps. A couple of instructions, please put yourself on mute. If you're not on mute now, please do so, and then just unmute yourself when you're called on to speak. We also ask that if it's possible to keep your camera on. We really want to create that atmosphere of trust and vulnerability, and it's helpful for people to be able to see each other in order to do that. It's especially important in the small group setting. We understand sometimes there are exceptions and it can't be done, but if you can turn on your camera, please do. We do have closed captioning available. You can turn your subtitles on if you'd like to see that. We will ask you to submit your questions and your comments via the chat box. You can do that at any time. In order to participate in the breakout sessions, you do need to have the Zoom app downloaded on your computer or your phone. You can't do it from the browser. And again, we ask that your camera be on, especially during the breakout sessions. We are recording this town hall so that we can provide the recording to you afterward. Any other materials, the slides, any references that are brought up, materials that are offered, we will put that all in a packet and send it to everybody who is registered for this town hall. We will also be meeting the Anti-Racism Task Force tomorrow to debrief and to explore other action items that we might take out of this meeting. Finally, we need to go over our communication guidelines and our ground rules. The first one is honesty. We don't get together to debate. This isn't about being right or wrong, but about being willing to share our honest experiences and beliefs and to be willing to listen to the experiences and thoughts and beliefs of others. Equality. We do have experts tonight to talk to us about their field of interest, but all of us are equal and valuable contributors to the conversation. Respect. All of us have preconceived ideas and they can get in our way of listening to each other. So we want to be aware of that so we can remain respectful throughout our conversation. We want to practice active listening, which can be a real challenge in our society and a real challenge on a virtual meeting. So we really invite you to put aside all of the other interruptions and pay attention to whoever is speaking rather than thinking about what you might want to say. Responsibility. We all have hot buttons. They can get pressed unintentionally. So if that happens, we want to be able to name it without blaming somebody else for it. And finally, this is a shame-free zone. We work hard to bring people into the conversation that haven't been part of it before. And we need to have that place where we can ask the questions, where we can stumble and not be completely sure of ourselves so that we can unpack and share our thoughts and decide what of that we want to continue to carry with us. Shame never leads to positive change. It only pushes negative things deeper underground. So this is a shame-free environment. If everybody is good with these ground rules, then I invite you to continue with the conversation. If there's anybody that feels like they're going to have difficulty, that they don't agree or want to comply with any of the ground rules, this would be a good time to leave the conversation and to come back at a time that would be better suited. We do have a quick polling question to get us started. So if you would just rank this, what is your level of confidence talking about race and racism on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being I have no confidence talking about race or racism, and 10 being I am completely confident talking about race and racism. And there's a second question that says, is racism present in our community? Not at all, minimally, somewhat, regularly, or always, because the problem is systemic. You need to answer both questions and then hit the submit button for your answers to be recorded. So we're just going to take another 20 seconds for this and invite everybody to please answer both questions and hit the submit button. And I'll close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let me share these results. So that you can all see. And the second question. There we go. I'm going to stop sharing this now. And with that, I want to introduce our first speaker, Dale Zahn from West Michigan Lakeshore Association of Realtors. And I will stop sharing my screen so that you can have a bigger picture of Dale in front of you.
Oh boy. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for the invite. And thank you to the Momentum Center for hosting this conversation. It's never too late to start having a conversation about things that are important. And it has been deemed important. This is April. It's National Fair Housing Month. I never could quite understand that. It's 1 month. There's 12 months in the calendar year. It should be an ongoing thing, not just 1 month to celebrate fair housing. In organized real estate, we like to say, I've always liked to say to our members, it's not only the law of the land, it's the right thing to do, and it's just plain good business. Okay, that being said, the issues are real. My career, for those who don't know me, goes back to the days of polyester powder blue leisure suits. Yeah, I started in this business, I'm getting some smiles, when I was quite a bit younger. Actually, I'll be honest with you, it started 48 years ago. I was in the trenches. I was a card-carrying realtor. I was a real estate agent. I was a broker. I was a trainer. I was a recruiter. And that lasted for 17 years. And it was in and around the Chicago area. I need not tell you what the Chicago area is all about in terms of its place in fair housing history. The rest of my career has been in association management, both in the Iowa, Illinois Quad Cities and here in West Michigan, where I've been for 22 years. Now, I began this journey in organized real estate only a few years after 1968, the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 68. At that time, organized real estate offered really weak training. Real estate agents were told, don't discriminate, never really defined what that was, but they were told don't do it. And we all in the industry said, good idea. Nobody discriminates. We're all wonderful people. Nobody'd ever think to do those things. Realtors would hear things then, and I know they still hear them now, like from a buyer. I don't want to live in a neighborhood where I wouldn't really feel all that welcome, or maybe sellers saying, don't bring us any of those, those people of color. They called them other things when I started, but I'm going to be nice today. Some agents went along with what buyers and sellers said. The more astute agents did not. Then the industry began celebrating Fair Housing Month every April. That's great, except as I said earlier, it should be more of an ongoing thing every month, every day throughout the course of the year. It's everybody's responsibility. Do I have any firsthand knowledge after all the years I've been in this business? Oh, yeah. Firsthand knowledge of discrimination, sure. And it's not always from real estate practitioners. It's from bankers. It's from appraisers. It's from cities, village, government authorities that over the years have created barriers and actually had policies, firsthand knowledge I have of them, to create quotas. And then after you get to the quota, which you finally flushed out, what's an average, what's a good quota? Oh, 80-20, except if the 20 are all together. Oh, please. How you deal with all of this? This is stuff that we're still talking about now, and we should be talking about it. Some communities, it's all right to have integration, great idea, but not too many. Not too many. There were charts I personally saw on walls in a city hall, color-coded with pins, and they all identified the color of the person that lived at the address that the pin was in. So those things actually had gone on. Do things like that and ugliness, does it still exist here in West Michigan? Oh, yeah. I moved to West Michigan 22 years ago. So I've been here a while, but I'm still looked at as a transplant, so to speak. 22 years ago. Let me walk down memory lane with you. This is why I get passionate about this, as you can well tell. 22 years ago, my wife and I moved to Michigan. The month was April. Tulip time in Holland was in May. We go to the first Tulip Time festival that we ever attended. Shortly thereafter, we open a local newspaper. Local newspaper's got a letter to the editor from a person that says, how come they're letting those Mexicans in our Dutch parade? Right there for all to see, Holland, Michigan. 20 years ago, we're in Chicago, back in my hometown. And we're with a group of West Michigan realtors. Now, please brace yourself. Those who know me, there are some on here that do know I will be blunt. My wife and I walk out of a restaurant. We get in a cab with two of the most beautiful people you would ever want to know, good friends of ours. Husband and wife, both retired military. She actually still in the Marine Corps Reserves as a major. Both MBAs from St. Ambrose University. We were there when they got them bestowed upon them. Good friends, good people. They were Black and West Michigan realtors. Ask me later, why'd you get in the car with those people? I says to my wife, what are we getting into? What is this area of West Michigan? Appraisers, they play a role. So what other kind of things? Oh, how about this? I was a realtor back in the Chicago area, as I said earlier, 17 years. I sell my sister a house. I get a call from the vice president of the bank that was going to make them the loan. Calls me and says, Dale, sister wants to buy on that street, over in the suburbs. You really think that's good for us to be making a loan over there? His name was Ron. I said, Ron, make the damn loan. Don't have this discussion with me. Make the loan. So that kind of thing went on. Here in West Michigan, Muskegon Heights, we've got members. I'm blunt about it. They are our members. They help pay my salary, but we have members that say, you don't want to buy in Muskegon Heights. You don't even want to list there. Give it to Anthony. He'll do it. Hey, that's just plain wrong. I wrote an article that resonated with a person of color. probably 15, 18 years ago here in West Michigan, when we got wind of a high-end property that was ready to close, and the seller found out the buyer was Black and did everything he could to queer the deal before the closing. And I wrote an article about that. And I had a gentleman that came to me and he said, you know, that really rung a bell, and I appreciate you doing that. There are all kinds of ugly comments and things that have happened out there. I was president of a condo association board in West Michigan. Member of the community calls me up and says, Dale, do you know there are minorities looking at condos in our neighborhood? You have to stop that. I said, no, I do not have to stop that. I will not stop that. Conversation's over. I don't want to make the 10 o'clock news. You got it? And she says, well, they're going to bring in their extended families and park their trucks on our front lawn. These things happen here, half-mile north of my office. High school kids wearing Ku Klux Klan hoods. Really? Those things are not born into the genes. Those things come from the parents. So, and then that's my opinion. So anyway, society in general, what do I think in terms of organized real estate? I think society in general needs a major attitude adjustment. The National Association of Realtors, along with HUD, has to shoulder some of the responsibility. For years, National Association of Realtors and HUD encouraged discrimination. I wonder and hope that many of you know that, but they did. It was the law of the land that real estate people could not bring people into a neighborhood if they thought it would adversely impact the property value. Come on. It was actually okay to discriminate on the basis of race. 1974, first Code of Ethics article in the 100+ year history of the National Association had a code of ethics, and it was all about thou shalt not discriminate on the basis of race, creed, national origin. 1989, they added religion, familial status, and handicap to the code. 2010, 12 years ago, sexual orientation. 2014, gender identity. 2020, 2 years ago, Standard 10.5, Article 10, makes it unethical, subject to severe sanctions. There have been some here in Michigan for people that used hate speech, epithets, harassing speech online and social media. Those are tools that need to be used. Fair housing centers, there are representatives on here today, along with organized real estate, are willing to take up the issues and hear the complaints, hold the people accountable. We've got to educate and we got to enforce. There's two things. You got to educate and you got to enforce. So what do? Keep having these conversations, drive the message home, hold the persons accountable that need to be held accountable, whether they're real estate people, cities, governmental bodies, or whatever. Never stop trying. It's never something you want to quit trying to do. I'll end with a simple reference to a photo I wish I had of my granddaughters in Northern Illinois, along with their friends in the neighborhood. And it's a picture of my son, who's pretty well known on TV. Some of you may have seen him. If it's about toys and they reference the Rock Father, that's my boy. And he had a picture of the backside of this group of kids. There were about 7 of them, and they're all holding hands. Black, white, Mexican, white, black, Mexican. And that's the way it ought to be. So educate, report to the Department of Civil Rights, to the Fair Housing Centers, to organized real estate. And that's all I've got, other than, as I end every program with, thanks for having me. God bless America. Barbara.
Dale, thank you so much. I so appreciate your passion as well as your information and the data, the facts. Please, if you have questions for Dale, go ahead and start putting those in the chat. We'll pose the questions after all of our speakers are completed, which means we're going to move right over to Anthony Lambers. Anthony, if you would unmute yourself and take the floor.
All right. So I'm going to just tell a little bit more of a story. I can go on about racism all day, all night. But an idea that I had around the time that COVID had is that I was going to go into Muskegon Heights and I was going to start rehabbing Muskegon Heights. And I got that idea. I grew up in Southeast Side, Grand Rapids. I grew up over in the wealthy Fuller, Franklin area, which at that time was I guess you could consider ran down. Houses were 20, 30,000. And it used to be, before, those were really good houses. Like all the wealthy people lived in that area. And then the redlining stuff happened and it ran everybody. All the whites ran out. The money ran out and the rentals kicked up and the poverty set in. And then these ghettos started to form. Well, the same thing had happened with Muskegon Heights, but what I seen happen in Grand Rapids was once it deteriorated enough, the same people that ran out, sold off, came back. They bought the properties again, and then they racked the prices way up. A house in Wealthy and Fuller now is $400,000. So all those people there that get pushed out and they get moved to another area, the Wyomings, the Kentwoods, all of the rental areas. And I kept looking at Muskegon Heights. And when I first became a realtor, I remember the other real estate agents in that first month I became a realtor, they all told me, you need to go sell houses in Muskegon Heights. Them are the only people that are going to deal with you. And I just felt like, wow, their view of my people was so off and wrong that it just kind of always sat with me. So when I finally got the opportunity to go back into the hood, and that's what I'm going to call it, because that's what I grew up calling it, I decided I was going to fix it up and find a way to stop the gentrification so that my people don't get ran out of their area. And the way that I found to do that is getting rid of greed, being able to make a profit, but allowing people in that community to be able to afford those homes. So what do you see a lot of times happen is investors come in, they buy properties, they jack it up so high that only one sector of people can afford them homes. And it's not the people in that neighborhood, and they have to leave. The only other way they get to stay is that the investors come in and they buy these houses and they rent them out. They become landlords, and we keep the rental mentality within that culture, which I think that's the problem. We talk about equality, there's equity, right? How can we get the people that live in those communities that are hardworking, want to live there, be around their family, be able to have equity? So I get this house and it's pretty much condemned. I've got the house for like $500. It's fallen in. It was rated for crack 4 or 5 times and just shut down and left to abandon. There was a whole block of them. So I started working on this house. You know, I got it through the whole COVID, the whole first year of COVID in 2020. I'm working on this home. And I'm in there and I'm like, man, everything that they're saying about this city isn't even true. Like they would say, if I was going there, I was going to get shot. People were going to steal all my stuff. I flipped a lot of houses in my days, and Muskegon Heights is the only place I haven't had a single nail stolen from my house. So right away, I was like, okay, there's a bad perception of what's really going on in here. As I started to build the house and get the grass to turn green and fix the siding and fix the roof, I noticed that the neighbors started fixing their roofs and fixing their windows and fixing their yard. It was a leadership component of it. Somebody needed somebody to lead and be able to say that this is okay to do this and this is how this works. And one quick story in that is I remember I ordered some mulch for landscaping. It came to like $100. And a lady across the street came over and she asked me, how much did it cost? And I said, it cost $100. And she goes, I always thought that was thousands of dollars. So I never, ever got it for my yard. I said, no, it's $100. And here's the number for the guy that you got to call to get it. Within 2 days, her whole around her house was lined with mulch. She had put new grass seed down. Her neighbor started to. 3 doors down started to. By the end of the summer, everybody on my block on 8th Street had green grass growing. People were starting to repair their sidewalks and their driveways. And I'm thinking to myself, man, look at all this home ownership coming out. The man across the street came to me and said he wanted to own a home, but he didn't know how to go about it. So I spent a few days and hooked him up with my connections. And by the end of the summer, he was a homeowner. He had actually bought the house that was next to the one that he was renting and moved into that one. So then I got to thinking, okay, well, why does it happen that more people aren't being able to buy and live in their own communities? And the reason why is because everybody that goes in those communities is choosing profit over people, period. Because I could have took that house and I could have sold it for $149,900 and people in that neighborhood probably wouldn't have bought it. But I sold it at $99,900. which allowed a young lady that was working at the hospital with 2 kids, a minority, was able to become a homeowner. Now she's going to be able to teach her daughter to be a homeowner and her friends to be a homeowner. There's a leadership component. But what we seem to do is when we go into the areas that are distressed, we kind of suck and leech off of them and get everything that we can get off of them. I hear it now when I tell people about my experiences in Muskegon Heights, they all tell me that it's either, why are you there? That's a stupid investment, or jack that price up. And I recently heard about a group of people that were coming in there to build new homes, and everybody was like, yay, new homes, new homes. And then I hear next that the homes are going to be 200 to 250,000. And everyone's like, yeah, new homes, new homes. And then I hear that there's going to be a subsidy for that because they know that it won't be able to sell for those prices. So what we're really saying is, yo, the builder, you're going to make all the money, but we're going to put a homeowner here that's going to have no equity. And if you have no equity, you're just a glorified renter. So that's the systemic racism. And we don't seem to ever really see it because we choose to look at dollars in America over people. It's been that way. It's a fact. It's how it works. I've been that way. I've had situations where I've tried to milk something for the most that I could get because I grew up with a poverty mindset. So the minute I see an opportunity, I try to milk it. But as I get older and I start to worry about people and I start to worry about my culture, I realize that there needs to be leadership, and it can't just be basketball courts, and it can't just be telling our people that all they can do is rap and entertain. We have to be able to go in for free and teach our people how to build, how to invest, how equity works, why it works. There's all these different platforms that we can use, and it's kind of along the lines of mentorship. The problem is people don't want to take the time, and if it doesn't affect them directly, then they really just don't care. And that's human nature, right? If it doesn't affect you, then you don't bother it. Well, it bothers me because what I see is I mentor a lot of the youth, and I mentor a lot of the youth, the minorities in the inner cities. And I'm always shocked at how they look at life. They don't look at it like me because the opportunities that I have, they don't have at the present time, and they don't know how to get it. And I should rephrase that. We all have the same opportunities, but some of us don't have the roadmap to get to it. So Muskegon Heights, now I'm watching as that's going. And once I started going on social media saying I was in Muskegon Heights, it didn't take nothing but 90 days. And there was 20 other people running to the Heights, but they weren't running to the Heights with my mentality. They were running to the Heights to milk off of the people. And what they want to happen is to put up the $200,000 houses, and then the white folk will move in, and then the black folk will be pushed into more of a renting situation, and they're going to build up that neighborhood, and then the culture is going to have to move out to somewhere different. It's what happens. If you look at Wyoming in Grand Rapids, when I grew up in Wyoming, it was all well-to-do white folk. And then now when Wealthy and Fuller jacked up the prices and they had to run out, they went to where all the renting was at. So now they're in Wyoming and they're in Kenwood. It's the exact same thing that will happen in Muskegon Heights. It's the same thing that's happened in Compton, California, and the same things that happen in New York. It's an American thing. It's an American issue. So my thought is we have to start putting the people over the profit. And until we do that, we're going to have these pockets around America that are just not growing. And in some ways, I think the top 1% want that because they hold the top 1%, the 1% will hold it all. But if you really want your neighborhood to be strong, if you really want your community to be strong, the weakest part of your community needs to be educated, it needs to be mentored, it needs to be taught. Then you have a strong community. It's one thing to say, hey, Norton Shores is a great place to live, but hey, don't go to Muskegon Heights. Your whole community isn't strong then. It's all got to be together. So my 10 minutes is up. That's what I've been told.
All right, Anthony, thank you too. I just am so grateful for the passion that both of our panelists have brought to this topic tonight, and for your personal story, Anthony. We're going to move on to Lynn Raymond from the Housing Alliance, Lakeshore Housing Alliance. Lynn, if you would unmute yourself, and I believe you have slides to share.
I do have some slides, and I'll go ahead and share them, but I just want to thank Anthony and Dale for their really powerful and compelling personal stories about their connection with this topic. I'm going to share some data, which is maybe compelling, but maybe not as powerful as some of what you've heard so far. Let me just get this. I'm sorry, it's having a little trouble getting the bar to disappear. For some reason, I can't get the bar to disappear, so I can't start my slideshow. But once I do, excuse me, I will. But, yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me, Barbara. I just want to give a little bit of a background of the Lakeshore Housing Alliance. We've existed since 1997, when the Department of Housing and Urban Development required any community receiving federal funding for homeless services to organize into what HUD was calling or referring to as continuums of care. So the Lakeshore Housing Alliance, as the continuum of care for Ottawa County, has been tasked with, over the last 25 years, to facilitate the distribution of federal and state funding for homeless services. And we have also been focusing on bringing an end to homelessness. Over the years, we've been given the task of creating a strategic plan to bring about an end to homelessness. So we coordinate a collaborative response to homelessness, a response that includes a variety of housing and services, including street outreach, emergency shelter, rental assistance, and permanent housing. And we believe housing is a human right. Unfortunately, access to safe, affordable housing is out of reach for many in our community. And we often think of housing being out of reach financially. People simply can't afford the few units that are available, or the barriers, such as prior evictions or criminal background, are just too high to overcome. But as we've already heard tonight, people of color have an additional barrier: discrimination based on race and color, ethnicity, or national origin. And earlier this month, a study conducted by Zillow, a real estate data firm, reported that Black Americans, for example, pay significantly more in security deposits than their white counterparts, to the tune of about $150 on average. Rental application fees were also higher for Black, Asians, and Hispanics. Nikitra Bailey of the National Fair Housing Alliance said in response to the study, "Some landlords continue to engage in practices rooted in this unfounded dissociation between race and risk, in which people of color are viewed as unlikely to consistently pay their rent." And I would also say, as Anthony shared, race is also, there's unfounded association between race and property maintenance. And that phrase just really keeps running around in my head, rooted in an unfounded association between race and risk. And I remember several years back when, in conversation with a white landlord, she told me she wasn't racist, but she would never again rent to Jamaicans because of one family who left her unit in poor condition. She was equating race and national origin with risk, and made a decision that affected many who may have been interested in renting from her. This association of race and risk is evident in a new working paper, also from the National Bureau of Economic Research, that shows property managers are less likely to respond to prospective Black and Hispanic tenants when they inquire about open listings. The study started with made-up names inquiring by phone, and then they followed up with real testers, people of different races and ethnicities who test the market for discrimination. Researchers found if a landlord or property manager ignored an inquiry from a person of color was 17% less likely to actually inhabit a given property. Unfortunately, even though race and ethnicity are protected from discrimination by the Fair Housing Act, as people of color may and often do face discrimination when the landlord or property manager is making a decision about who to rent to. Nonprofit organizations, such as the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan, take on the Herculean task of responding to complaints and addressing housing discrimination. The Fair Housing Center is an active member of the Lakeshore Housing Alliance, and it follows up on complaints such as these discriminatory statements you see on the screen. These kinds of suspicions might drive an individual to report an incident to the Fair Housing Center. Once a possible fair housing violation, meaning a protected class under federal, state, or local law, and a prohibited behavior, such as refusal to rent or sell, has been identified, the Fair Housing Center will conduct an intake. The Fair Housing Center can conduct testing in response to an allegation or active complaint if the housing is still available and/or the housing provider has other properties with openings. Testing for complaint investigations can only be done if the circumstances can be closely replicated. So you can see the challenge the Fair Housing Center has in addressing housing discrimination. In the last 5 years, the Fair Housing Center has conducted 25 intakes in Ottawa County alleging discrimination by race, color, and/or national origin and ethnicity. These allegations included differences in treatment, refusal to sell or rent, harassment, intimidation, and discriminatory statements like the one on the previous slide. While disability was by far the protected class with the most intakes completed, race and color and national origin and ethnicity ranked 3 and 4 respectively. Since 1999, 85 intakes in Ottawa County alleged discrimination by race, ethnicity, and/or national origin. 161 total intakes if we include Allegan and Muskegon County in the mix. And I forgot to mention that the Lakeshore Housing Alliance is a program of United Way. Since 2013, we've been a part of United Way. Back then, United Way was really interested in elevating the housing conversation. And so they took on the Lakeshore Housing Alliance as a program. And so we work together with organizations such as the Fair Housing Center to ensure everyone in the community has a safe, affordable place to call home. Data help us identify gaps in services. Many of you are familiar with ALICE, a study of the financial challenges of asset-limited, income-constrained, and employed households. ALICE data show that people of color are more at risk for losing their housing. Many are just one emergency away from potential homelessness because so many live below the ALICE threshold. I would encourage you to visit our website at www.oauw.org. We are now Ottawa, United Way of Ottawa and Allegan counties, to see the latest ALICE report. There's an interactive version which will allow you to look at all the states that are studied, as well as ALICE in Focus, which will tell you how children are faring. ALICE data may not specifically point to housing discrimination. It does point to households at risk of homelessness. The LHA gathers data or gathers information about people experiencing homelessness through a shared database, a homeless management information system. Most agencies that provide housing services to people experiencing homelessness enter data into the system so we can come to some conclusions about how people are being served. We ask ourselves, how effective are we at closing the front door or stopping people from becoming homeless? And how effective are we at opening the back door out of homelessness? The LHA has been studying race and ethnicity data for the past year or so to help us answer these questions. What is most compelling is that while Black households are as likely or more likely to access permanent housing opportunity once connected to housing programs, homeless housing programs, they are far more likely to become homeless in the first place and more likely to move to temporary destinations like living with family and friends once they leave homelessness. And this is where the challenge for the LHA and others, Not only do people of color face discrimination when seeking rental housing, more study needs to be conducted to determine if race and ethnicity play a part in people losing their housing. A recent local study conducted by Grand Valley State University students and Good Samaritan Ministries seemed to indicate that income is less of a factor. So what you can afford is less of a factor than the race of a household when facing eviction. So what can you do? And we've already talked about a couple of these things. Certainly you are more than welcome to join us at the Lakeshore Housing Alliance. We meet on the first Friday of every even month. And currently we're meeting via Zoom. So if you're interested in joining that conversation, you can contact me. As always, the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan is a key partner in these efforts. Learn about the services of the Fair Housing Center, become familiar with what housing discrimination looks like. And obviously, we've already talked about the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. They've got some great goals and objectives to look at their website. So thank you so much.
Lynn, thank you for sharing the numbers that really show how prevalent the individual stories that Anthony and Dale shared are. We're going to go into a question and answer period of time now, and there were a couple sent ahead of time. I know there have been a couple in the chat already, but please, if you have questions for any of our speakers, put them in the chat box now. If they're for a particular person who spoke, you can indicate that, or if it's to anybody in general, that's fine as well. And Mary Jane, I will let you take over here.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The first question is for Anthony. Anthony, someone would like to know what regulations might be put in place to deter people from flipping homes or turning them into Airbnbs for profit?
Good question. I don't think that flipping homes is a problem. I think it's the mindset of the flipper that's the problem. I think one thing that would help is that we allow, so certain governments in the cities allow anyone to come in and flip homes from anywhere. So when I was looking for houses in the Heights, I noticed a lot of the people that owned them were in Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta. They had never even been to Muskegon Heights. So they don't really care what happens. I think it's important that we let the investors that live in the area come in first. Let them be the ones that invest in their neighborhood and build it up. Someone who lives in Muskegon Heights has way more to give Muskegon Heights in an investment form than someone from LA does. Someone from LA is only looking for profit. People that are living in Muskegon Heights are going to do a way better job of keeping things in tune in their own community than someone further out. But what you run into is a lot of these city governments hold these properties and they're waiting for the big buck guy. They're waiting for the guy that's going to come in. And I know this for a fact because I've tried to get homes in Muskegon Heights. And the tune of it is, no, these aren't for sale right now, even though they're boarded up, the grass is growing, the roofs are falling in, trees have landed on the roof, and no one's fixing it up. Because what they're waiting for is a John Rooks to come through with $10 million and buy up all the block. And then when that happens, he's going to build nothing but high-end property. I'm not saying him specifically, but that type of person is going to come through. They're going to build up the block with $200,000 houses, and then the people in their neighborhood don't have a shot. But what about me, who's not a big-time millionaire, but has enough money to rehab a home? The damage that I'm going to do in that area is going to be minimal compared to what someone from out of town does. So I think what cities could do and townships could do is they could maybe, the regulation word scares me because then you start to tighten up stuff so much and no one wants to do anything. But what about more of a way of saying, listen, the first comers, we would like to be people who live in Muskegon Heights and give you an opportunity to come in and buy these homes and fix these homes up. I think that would help a lot because a guy from LA who never visits here could care less about what's happening.
Thank you. That's a great answer. The next question is for Dale. Dale, what's being done to generate housing for incomes less than 40% of the area median income? Might you be able to field that question for us?
Yeah, I can field it and kind of toss it back. I don't really have the answer to that. What is being done in terms of from organized real estate? I'm not sure that's entirely the role of the real estate practitioner, as it might be more to the banking community in terms of qualifications and special programs or programs from the government to help out. But my members, such as Anthony, yeah, they'll do some flips here and there, but they list and they sell properties, they resell them and so forth. So I'm really not in a good position to answer that, the what's being done.
Let me just ask Anthony or Lynn if they have any comments about what might be happening to generate housing for the lower income population.
I can add a little bit. Yeah, I think it is the category of housing that is growing the least at this point. I mean, we are certainly in the southwest part of the county, we're seeing lots of housing developments, from workforce to market rate apartments in particular. There are several nonprofit organizations, and really, I think a couple of years ago, there were the only organizations that actually created housing less than $250,000 were nonprofits for purchase. And so we are seeing, at least in the southwest portion of the county, some nonprofit organizations that are creating housing opportunities, both rental and for purchase. It's definitely not as fast or as low as we'd like. The prices are not as low as we'd like, but certainly when we see churches and nonprofit organizations like Habitat for Humanity, there is some movement, not as much as we'd like to see.
Thank you, Lynn. We want to stick with you for just a moment. People are wondering how to advocate for fair housing in our own community. The last slide of your PowerPoint had a few suggestions. Would you like to speak to that maybe once more or underscore any points?
Well, I would certainly say whenever we talk about fair housing, and I agree with Dale, it's not just once a month, it is the thread that runs through everything we do when we work with housing. Make sure you connect with the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan. They are the go-to organization. They do amazing work in opening up housing units to free them up from discrimination. It is an incredible resource. So if there was one thing you could do, I would say connect with the Fair Housing Center and familiarize yourself with what housing discrimination looks like.
Thank you, Lynn. The next question is for all the speakers. A participant is wondering how Black churches can get involved in the real estate market and what might prevent them from participating.
Let me field that, if I might. And then, Anthony and Lynn can certainly chime in. You open the door, whoever asked that question, you open the door to something, and we'd be delighted to have you at the table for a host of reasons. First up, even on the national level, the National Association of Realtors is finally, if you will, awakened to the need for DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion. And associations of realtors throughout the land are being encouraged to have DEI communities. Here's a stark, unfortunate reality in West Michigan. We try to reach out and get people. We had a fair housing committee a number of years ago. We don't have one right now. It's an offshoot of the education committee. We do things, we talk about things, and we have classes, and that's about it. But if we could at West Michigan Lakeshore amp up an equal opportunity committee and involve, and I would have to do a little massaging, but I'm kind of good at this. I might be able to do it, to get outside entities to the table. In other words, not realtors, although we'd like realtors as well, not necessarily affiliates. We have a lot of mortgage bankers, some are on this presentation tonight, and we can involve them, but maybe the community activists like that raise that question. If we could get a DEI community or a DEI committee up and running and going and just knock things around and talk candidly, talk the talk, what can we do together? I'd love to do that. So get with me. I'll put my email address in the chat there and we'll be glad to talk with you.
I could also, I just wanted to share, there are 2 churches in the Holland area that are proposing developments, low-income housing tax credit developments. And I think that's something that lots of churches could consider. And I think in particular, Black churches not only could participate in something or could work towards something like that, but they would also probably have a lot of the experiences that we're talking about today and be able to really paint a picture for their communities about how what happens in their communities as far as housing discrimination is concerned. So that is just one example of something that's happening with other churches in the county.
And Liz, Lynn, if I might chime on to that, because you're onto something here. And you mentioned Habitat for Humanity, for example, earlier. They do a lot of great things too for people that certainly are in need and have got some great success stories. And it just resonates with me because tomorrow is their Lakeshore Habitat Luncheon, which several of us are going to be attending at the Civic Center in Holland. So Habitat for Humanity is doing some fine things too.
The next question is, has the lease to buy model that's used for automobiles ever been considered for housing?
I can chime in on that if one of my peer talkers here is not going to do it first. Yeah, as I pointed out earlier, I go back a long way. And when I was in the trenches and not an association exec, and I was listing and selling, and I was in the Chicago area, that was huge. It was absolutely huge. And there were several companies, that's almost all they did. Rent to buy. Portion of the monthly rent went into escrow. That became part of the down payment money against the purchase price. Those programs are doable. And maybe it's time we bring them back. They're not that difficult. And we've got some lenders on here. I'd be curious to know what they would have to say, whether they would buy into that and permit that. I don't know why they wouldn't, because the money would be the borrower's money, just taken from rent and put over in another pot to go toward the down payment. So yes, it's doable.
Can I say
Anthony.
something?
Yeah.
So that lease to buy model. So what I think is that what I've seen that happen in this industry is there's usually a higher interest rate attached to that. There's a higher fallout attached to that. The skin in the game usually isn't that deep. I actually would like to take it further and like, what can we do? And the churches would be a good place to go to this, but where do we go to do the real education of how the mortgage and the equity and the credit and the savings and the financial literacy, where does that really come into play? Right? Like there's something to be said about hard work and patience to get what we want. And a lot of times we try to get things so fast and we get them so fast and then we don't understand all the fine print that comes with it. And when it's time to run, we run. Like if you look at the land contract fallout that I've seen over like the last, not so much now because there's not that many, but 10 years ago, it was crazy because these people were getting actual foreclosures put on the record over a land contract on a title that they didn't even own the whole house. And the reason they did it is because they didn't want to put in the work to fix their credit. A lot of them were so scared to even look at their credit. They didn't even know what it looked like. They just said, hey, I didn't pay my Meritech bill back in 1993. I'm not touching this thing, leaving all the equity of their life on the table. To me, it can be counterproductive when I would rather spend the time giving the education to the community about how you can actually become a homeowner. There's the rental mentality, and then there's the owner mentality. And in the Black culture, we need to own. We've done enough renting. We've been renting the whole damn time. At what point do we want the 40 acres and the mule? We got an opportunity to go get it, but we got to go get it. And the only way to go get it is to be taught how to get it. And we're not being taught. We're given the surface stuff. Get good credit, go get a mortgage. That's it. And a lot of them just say, I'm scared of it. They don't even want to feel, whenever clients call me, you'd be surprised how many clients call me and they're scared to get their credit checked. And then they get it checked and they find out they can actually own a home. But for 10 years, they haven't checked it because they're scared to hear no. They're scared of the rejection. But what if we could make these people empowered to where they weren't so scared, they would actually look at their credit. They would actually have somebody walk with them to help them get the credit right, to understand how the equity is going to come into play later in life. Like you can rent forever, but what are you going to do when you're 65 years old and your job's done and you got to pay for your health insurance and you got to, by that time, rent's going to be $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment. And now your whole pension and everything is going to your rent and you got nothing to show for it. It's not only that you need the money to send your kids to college or to be able to fall back on something, you need to be able to pay something off so that you don't have a debt when you're 65 years old. I think we do better teaching that philosophy and understanding. There's the poverty mindset, and then there's the abundance mindset. We need to start giving the abundance mindset to guide people into those areas so they can actually be owners.
Thank you. Barbara, do we have time for one more question, or do we need to go to breakout rooms?
You know, I was just typing you, Mary Jane, because I don't want to end this and we need to go into breakout rooms. So maybe one question with very short, succinct answers, and then we'll go into breakouts.
Then this might be the perfect question. Someone keeps hearing about houses getting purchased with cash way over the appraisal price and waiving inspections. Who's buying these houses?
Rich people. People who have money, people who are in the top 10%, they're the ones that are buying them. That's how it stays in rotation. Son calls dad, dad has $200,000 in the bank, understands the philosophy of ownership and equity and that he's not going to lose that money. He's going to make that money later. That's financial literacy. Those are the people that are coming out of the woodwork. It's an opportunity right now for the people who have money. The ones who don't, they're out of there.
That goes back to education. If you bring education back, I'm sorry, this is Marisol. I'm a mortgage lender, and Dale and Anthony have been doing an amazing job. But just to chime in, I think we need to bring it back into the schools. I think when even these high school kids and even middle school kids, we need to be taught what credit is. We need to be taught how to spend, what not to spend. My 28-year-old son has an 800 plus credit score. It's a better score than I am, only because I was able to teach what I know. There are so many avenues and great resources out there. If we were actually given the opportunity to teach all these children and,
Let's
graduate.
Thank you, Marisol. I appreciate your adding that. And I think it's a good segue into our small groups where we get an opportunity to kind of reflect on what we've been talking about and figure out action steps. What can we do? So I'm going to go ahead and move us into breakouts. You've been randomly assigned, and we'll open those now. And your facilitators are in those rooms. They have the questions, and we'll start with the first question and give you 7 minutes for that. Welcome back. This night is going entirely too quickly. We're going to report out now. I'm going to ask each of the facilitators to share one of the action steps that you came up with, an answer for question number 3. If you can state that succinctly and shortly, just a soundbite answer so we can get through the whole meeting. I'm going to start with group number 1 and Carrie. Carrie, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. We had such a great group of knowledgeable people in this area. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting was one of the gals said to make sure the schools are welcoming. She had a family of color who bought a home and everything, and then someone spray painted a nasty word on their driveway and they moved away again. And they didn't want to face it in school also. So to kind of check out the schools and make sure they are DEI well adjusted.
Thank you. Thank you, group 1 and Carrie. How about group 2, Mary Jane?
Thank you, group 2. We talked about financial literacy as being a solution, speaking up at township and city council meetings, and one novel idea was if churches could take a corner of their own property and build affordable housing there.
Excellent. Thank you, group 2. How about group 3, D?
Yes, we had a really good back and forth conversation. One of the main things that we talked about is obviously sharing the knowledge with others who aren't here and continuing that communication. But also when communities are making decisions about building new housing, we need to keep those open minds and changing our behaviors towards the attitude of not in my backyard, the attitude of somebody else can deal with that.
Excellent. Thank you, group number 3. How about group number 4, Greg?
Yeah, thanks to group number 4. I won't repeat some of our group echoes what I've already heard in terms of financial literacy. I would say 2 of our members are participating from 2 churches in the Holland community, First United and Hope Church, and they're actually doing something in their communities. They've partnered with the Dwelling Place. They're doing some development, affordable housing development projects on properties they own, and they're making an impact.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. How about group 5 and Holly?
We had a great conversation. We didn't spend enough time on question 3, but that's okay. So some of the gems were just do the right thing and create more opportunities for people to catch up.
Wonderful. Thank you, groups 5. How about group 6, Mary? Mary, you might need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I didn't know I was muted, Barbara. Community Action House this last year found 45 people housing. And one of the things that Community Action House did was there was a phone tree that they used to help the people actually resettle into their homes with furniture and things that they needed to set up their homes. And I thought that was a wonderful idea that we could utilize in this area as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, group 6. How about group 7, Carolyn?
Hi, yeah, we got into some really lively discussion. Didn't spend quite as much time on number 3, much like another group, but we did agree it's got to come from a grassroots type thing, and maybe having the churches be the start of it or an impetus of it to draw people in, because they have such a great solid community that and the trust is there. So for them to partner maybe with some realtors and mortgage people who enjoy, that type of work, to work with someone who's got a lot of questions, a first-time buyer, perhaps, things like that. I mean, not everybody does like to work with first-time borrowers, but to give the literacy that way, that might be one good takeaway.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. And I hope, the programs that are going on, if you can put that information in the chat box, then we can share that with everybody who's participating in the town hall. So I encourage you, those who are actively working in this space, to share your information so that we can share it more broadly. We're going to do some polling now. And the first one is our kind of post-meeting poll. We revisit the question of how present is racism in our community? And then how comfortable do you feel talking about racism now compared to when we started tonight? So if you just answer those 2 questions and hit submit. And we'll give that just a couple more seconds. We have almost 100%. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can see that we definitely had a growth in the number of people who believe that racism is systemic. And also we have 49% of our participants tonight feel more comfortable talking about race and racism at the end of this conversation. So that's really helpful news. I'm going to share the next question, which is an evaluation question. How helpful has this town hall been? Not at all. It made you more aware, motivated you to take action, or convinced you to become or continue as a leader in this area. And this is multiple choice. You can choose more than one. And again, just make sure you hit the submit after you make your selection. And we'll share those results There is one person who did not find this helpful. So thank you for staying in the conversation, even though you didn't feel that you benefited from it. We have 50% more aware, 40% motivated to take action, and 70% convinced to begin or continue as a leader. The next question has to do with interest in additional town halls. Would you be interested in participating in additional town halls is the first question. And if so, what topics would you like to see addressed? Organizations that are addressing racism, historical instances of racism in the Tri-Cities, local government actions and reactions, local businesses and the economics of race, implicit bias, white privilege, racism in healthcare, racism and mental health care. And again, choose all of those that you would be interested in pursuing. And we'll close that poll and share the results. 97% would be interested in another town hall. And the areas of greatest interest are local government actions and reactions and organizations that are addressing racism. And finally, this poll has to do with what actions are you willing to take? And you can choose multiples again. Read, listen, watch, learn more, increase your own knowledge, engage in more conversations about race and racism, engage in more conversations with people who are not the same race as yourself, get additional training from a long talk in having uncomfortable conversations, support diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at your school or workplace, attend implicit bias training, get involved in local government, such as the Human Relations Commission, donate to groups working in racial justice, join the community book club on race and racism, and invite other people to this series of town hall meetings. Choose all that apply. And we'll leave that up for just a few more seconds. And close it in 3, 2, 1. And I'll share those results. You can see that 87% said they'd like to engage in conversations of people of a different race, and 85% engage in conversations about race and racism. And scrolling down so that you can see all of those answers. Those are the polling questions. In terms of next steps, we will send the recording of this meeting, my slides, I'll get the copy of Lynn's slides, we'll get those to you, the chat materials, anything you've added to chat, and all of the remaining questions, anything in the chat box that didn't get asked, we will give those to the speakers. And Dale, Anthony, and Lynn, if you could please try to send a written response to those questions in the next 24 to 48 hours, we would like to include that in the packet that we send to everybody. And then the anti-racism team does meet tomorrow. We'll be taking all of the feedback from the small groups, reviewing that, looking at additional action steps we can take in planning those steps. Individually, we encourage you to go to the website, the Anti-Racism Task Force page, and note your reflections about this conversation and other things that you might have read or watched. If you read the book Color of Law or did other things to prepare, it would be good to hear your thoughts and reflections on that. And any actions that you're engaged in, planning to do, or have done, please report an action. It helps us know that we're not alone, that we're part of a community. Also want to invite you to the movie night at the Momentum Center in May, the second Friday of the month. We'll be showing the movie Up from the Bottoms, which is a documentary about the African-American migration from the Old South to Muskegon, Michigan, and deals with housing there. So I invite you to come. It's a free dinner and movie night. Dinner starts at 5 and the movie is at 6. Also, the town hall for May will be organizations that are working on racism. We'll hear from 3 different organizations and ways in which we're working to partner with those organizations. So mark your calendar for May 23rd so you can participate in that. I have just enormous thanks and gratitude to express to our speakers tonight. Dale, Anthony, Lynn, you were all amazing, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have heard from you, to learn from you, and I'm sure that that is shared by the rest of our participants tonight. I also want to thank the Anti-Racism Task Force. Please, as you visit these organizations, thank them for their commitment to justice and equity. Thank you to my facilitators, to Joanne for timing, for Mary Jane for providing the Q&A. And until next time, the divine in me recognizes and bows to the divine in you. Namaste.